Welcome, everyone, to our 63rd webinar here at Writer Access. Glad everyone could be here today. If you're not here, no worries. It's being recorded, and everyone will be receiving a link. It's our 63rd webinar, as mentioned. We've had some incredible guests, and they're all recorded and available on Writer Access for you to take a look at if you want. But with great pleasure, I'm here with Mathew Sweezey. Mathew, welcome.
Thanks, man.
Really enjoy not only having you here, but we enjoyed having you at Content Marketing Conference. You were a super popular speaker. We did lots of reviews, as you know, and everyone was really excited about this presentation or the variation that you presented at CMC, so we wanted to get this out to the masses as it was super popular and people were excited to hear from you. Before we begin, a couple of things just to go over to people. And the first being that I did mention the webinar is being recorded and it will be available for everyone. You'll be getting an email with not only a recording but the slides. We're going to leave, if possible, about 15 minutes for some questions and answers. And more importantly, I've decided to sort of have some breaks throughout this presentation where I chime in and ask a few questions. So feel free to post your questions throughout the presentation and I'll take a look. But I assure you, based upon doing about 300 podcasts that I do over at Life Tips, another company that I own, I love asking questions. I've developed both an art and science behind it, and I'll be sure to challenge Mathew with some incredibly difficult questions, Mathew. So get ready, brace yourself. We'll try to really dig deeply into the topics that you're talking about and ask some things off the cuff to have you talk. So you're welcome to make some fun posts. A bit about me, you know who I am. I'm very excited to be chairing CMC, which is we're gearing up towards. Look for some announcements on that coming up. And we have a few things in the oven in addition to Writer Access that I'll remain secret for a little while. But if you stay tuned to this webinar, you'll get some sneak peeks at that in the next few episodes. And I've just published my third book as well, which I'll probably be giving away for everybody, which is called 103 Content Marketing Tools. So you'll be getting a PDF version of that as well as part of a giveaway for everybody that has tuned in or even registered. So I want to first introduce Mathew and start asking a couple questions. Mathew, you're at Salesforce right now, but I know you have a history at Pardot. Where did your thirst for marketing automation begin, and what inspired you to write Marketing Automation for Dummies?
Yeah, so I've really always been interested in the idea of marketing. I've been writing on it in various different formats and publications for about 10 years or so now, covering anything from back in the days to work a lot with direct mail. We used to call it lumpy mail, all the way through. And then I really came across marketing automation. I had a startup, and it was in the lead generation space. I was looking for my next thing and came across Pardot as a company. And didn't really know a whole lot about marketing automation, and then was one of the early employees to help get that company up and off the ground, and that's kind of what started it. And then continued to write and create best practices for the marketing automation industry, and then the Dummies Corporation reached out and asked me to write Marketing Automation for Dummies for them. So that's kind of the long and the short of it.
You're out in California now, as I recall. Is that correct? But where are you from?
No, I'm still in Atlanta, where I was.
Oh, nice. Okay.
I haven't traveled too far.
Got it. Okay, super. Good for you. Born and raised there, or how did that work?
Yeah, I was born and raised here, actually. I'm one of the rare folks from the town they still live in.
That's terrific. And are you? Did you attend college in that area, or literally stay home base?
I attended the University of Georgia, so, kept it local.
Yeah, right on. And as far as the science of marketing automation, do you think it's changed radically in the last few years? And what has been the catalyst for that change?
Oh, yeah, it definitely has changed. And the catalyst for that change is simply the technology itself. And it's not the technology, per se, of a marketing automation system. It just is, in general, the technology of what can be automated across essentially the three channels of paid, owned, and earned media. And then in combination with what can be automated internally, it's just the entire system and structures and foundations. And we'll get into this in the webinar in terms of the environmental aspects of also the businesses, the consumers, and the media. So, I mean, the whole system has completely changed, but it's mostly due to the technology and its effects on the environment.
Final question. What is your favorite hobby or non-athletic sport?
Non-athletic sport?
Drinking, for example, is a non-athletic sport.
All right, so I own a brewery. So that's probably my non-athletic sport. So me and my buddies, do that. So
that's exciting. Good stuff. All right, without further ado, take it over, and I'll be looking to fire some questions at you throughout the presentation and at the end.
Awesome, cool, man. Well, once again, thanks everybody for joining us. We're going to get rocking and rolling. If you do want to catch up with the conversation, like Byron said, hashtag WAW at Writers Access, and my Twitter handle is real easy at Sweezey. And I thought it was great because one of my friends misread it, and now I'm Miss Wheezy on Twitter. So, that's a good way to keep up with us. All right, let's kind of hop in. It's really automating content marketing, and what I want you guys to understand is we're not necessarily going into automating all of the processes, but more or less automating the ideas and the systems. If you ever want to keep up with some other the places I've written for, please catch me on Mashable, Clicksy, different publications, books, all over the place. But let's kind of get into the meat of the conversation. And really what I want to start with is this idea of you need to understand the environment and how it's changed, and this idea of discovery. Right? It's the basic concept that we as humans want to discover things. The same concept and reason why when you take an idea to your boss and you say, hey, this is a great idea, and they say, not really, and then 2 weeks later they come back and say, hey, I had this great idea, because they think it was their idea and now they like it. We do the same thing when it comes to content and media, and we like to discover things rather than to have things put in front of us. We like to find them. And the reason we like to do that, and the reason I talked about technology being the catalyst for this, is you need to understand what we can discover now and how fast and how powerful our discovery mechanisms are. Right? The internet is a discovery mechanism, and this is a great example of the power of the internet, and specifically a Google search, but technically the power that you wield when you do a single Google search is more power than was required to land a man on the moon. So just think about that as a power, and then start to think about the environment and how it changes the environment, specifically the businesses, the consumers, and the media that connects those two. And now we as individuals, we now spend 12 hours a day in front of the screen. That's 12 hours a day in the UK. This is a study done by the National Institute of Health. In the United States, it's 12.28 hours a day. And really what this equates to is, for us as marketers, we kind of put this idea of in front of a screen in this term of noise. We like to say, all right, if that's how long someone's in front of a screen, how many advertisements are they then going to be seeing during that time? Hence, how much noise do I have to overcome to have a relevant engagement with that person? That would be, traditional media theory. Now, the idea of what noise is completely different in our infinite environment than it was in the traditional media environment, right? So think about this. Back in the day, you had 5 media channels, and we'll dive into these a little bit later, but now we have well over 200 media channels, and on those media channels, they're bi-directional, right? Social media. You can post as well as receive comments and questions and have a bi-directional engagement. And when we look at these things, what the idea of noise used to measure, the idea of noise was a measure of how much media could be produced by businesses. But now a majority of the media we produce is from consumers, no longer businesses. So the best estimates currently at the level of noise are about 5,000 ads per day. That's how many ads you essentially see on a daily basis from those 12 hours, as well as your walk around in the daily world. But back to that point, that's not the full story. That is not actually the level of digital noise that we as businesses have to overcome to drive a relevant engagement. I want you to think about the idea of media ubiquity. This is the first time in history this has ever happened. It's happened without us realizing it's happened. So before, go back to traditional media models. To create media, you had to be able to produce media. There was a cost associated. You had to be able to distribute media. There was a large cost associated. And then you had to be able to consume the media, which usually meant you had to then buy something else, which was either you had to buy a magazine, you had to subscribe to television channels, you had to do something to be able to consume that media. And that was also one direction. now it's bidirectional, and then you think about how we now create media, and you understand that more people in the world have access to a cell phone than have access to clean drinking water or electricity, and you can understand that media for the first time in history is frictionless or ubiquitous, meaning anyone can create it because it has no barrier to entry, anyone can distribute it from the palm of their hands, and anyone can consume it from the palm of their hands. So the level of digital noise that we're actually having to overcome is much, much higher than 5,000 ads a day. On average, someone in our demographic, being 18 to 34, is actually going to log on to Facebook 17 times a day. And each time they log on, there are 1,200 posts waiting for that person when they get on to Facebook. Now imagine, what are those posts? They are not advertisements. This is what we're trying to combat. We're trying to combat videos of babies, kids with bow ties. This is a video that actually popped in my news feed. It's a little tiny pug who starts licking this ice cream cone, and then the lady switches to the dog, and the dog takes one giant gulp and eats the entire ice cream cone, and it's super cute, and it has 10 million views. This is what we have to compete against. This is the level of noise that we are competing against with businesses, right? And we also have to remember that we're also competing with noise that is not human, right? So think about these things. You have notifications that pop up on your screen. You have alerts. These are also media events that are not human at all. There is no human creating these things, and they're just being digitally created, yet they are adding to that level of noise that we now have to combat to engage with somebody, right? So, and a good example of this is the notification that's pulling an event off your Google Calendar and sending a notification 10 minutes before that you have a meeting, right? So what we're competing against is all content. So when we make content, for us to be able to break through that level of noise that is now existing in this infinite environment, we have to be really, really good at the content we create to drive relevant experiences. Right, so what I want us to kind of get in our heads is this new idea, a new concept of what we need to create in this limitless media world. Right? And so the first thing I want to do is I want to kind of get to well, this is the joke, you know, it's the Let's Get Physical, that there's an old 80s song about this, but I want you to understand essentially how media has changed the way that you naturally engage with it. And if we can understand that, it then can give us clues into then what we need to create to then get engaged with. Right? So let's do a quick sample. Do you do A or B? So I'm going to ask you a survey. When you go in the morning and you open your email inbox, do you do the following? Do you do A? Do you open your email inbox, see the first email, open it, start reading that email, decide if it's relevant or not, and then choose to delete it or continue reading it, go back to the email inbox, do the same thing with the second, open it to see if it's relevant, and then, or do you do B? Do you scan your email inbox, delete what you don't like, and then work on the rest? Do you do A or B? All right, great. I can hear everybody, and everyone says B. I'm a mind reader. I've asked this question to thousands of people around the world, and everyone does B. So what you need to understand is something called heuristics. You have taught yourself naturally how to do this, right? No one ever taught you how to manage your email inbox, but your natural behavior to now dealing with a massive amount of media is to disqualify first and qualify second. So think about that, right? So this is how we engage with content. We engage with it in very specific ways. Now let me continue this to another question. Think about how you research. This is extremely important when we talk about content marketing for businesses. Understanding how people search and how people research topics is exactly the buying process. And if we can understand that, we can make content that is relevant and extremely effective in the buying cycle. Now, to understand this, we need to do some research. And so I actually sat down and did this research. So this consists of surveys with 400 B2B buyers. And what you're looking at on the screen is the average content that we engage with on a daily basis. So follow this chart along. The black dotted line is daily engagement with content. The dashed orange line is how we engage with research content. Let me define these two different things for you so you can understand. Right? The black dotted line is your daily consumption. Your average daily consumption is going to stay static, and it's going to kind of consist, and it's going to depend on how much media you normally consume. Some good examples of what this would be. My father at the same time every morning picks up the newspaper, reads it for the same amount of time, does the same crossword puzzle, and is done at the same time. He's then probably going to watch television at the same time during the day for the same amount of time, right? So this is in the modern world, we will spend on average 17 times a day, going back to Facebook, spending on average 2 to 3 hours per day on Facebook. Then you average, then you cross that across all the different mediums, and you will come up with an average number of content that we engage with, or an average amount. Now that drastically changes at one specific point in the relationship with the consumer, and that is when they start to do research. So let me ask you another question. When you go to do research on a product, right, this is also the modern point of sale in a buying cycle. Do you do A or B? Do you go online? Do you find a white paper? Do you download it? Do you log offline and read it? Or do you do B? Do you go online, find a lot of white papers, download them all, log offline, and hope to read them? Well, the answer is most likely B. Just about everybody I ask that question to does B. That's, once again, a heuristic in a behavior. It's something that you learn to do because the internet allows you that to happen. It allows you to find all those things super fast, and so you do. So what we should understand now, our natural model is to batch research. Now, compounding that question with my research, what I found was if you ask people how many times they then do that batch research over the course of a B2B buying cycle, you find the answer is on average 2 to 3 times. Well, if we then know that average is 2 to 3 times, we end up with a graph like this. So the daily flat line, and then when they start researching, there's 3 specific peaks. Once again, it's going to go up very fast due to the batch research, and it's to decline very fast due to the nature that they're going to drop off and go back to their average consumption. So that's what this graph means. Now, what this then applies to tactics for content marketing is the following thing. Let me kind of help you with a story so you can kind of understand this. I go to a wedding, and I'm a single guy, so they put me at the singles table, and I get seated next to this girl. I think they're trying to hook me up with this girl. And so we're sitting there, and I ask her, the normal polite questions, so what do you do? And she replies back, oh, I do marketing. I said, oh, well, this is great. I know a little bit about marketing. We can talk about this topic. And I said, so do you do email marketing? And she goes, yeah. I said, well, what tool do you use? And just for a little backstory, this is a point in time when Pardot had just been acquired by ExactTarget. So I was an ExactTarget employee at this time. And so then she says, oh, I use ExactTarget. Before I could say anything, she said, and I hate it. And I replied with, well, now this is awkward because I work for ExactTarget. So I was like, well, how can I help you? And she goes, well, it doesn't do good enough segmentation. A week before this conversation, Microsoft had just launched Microsoft 365, which was their new SaaS-based platform for their software. And it was using ExactTarget's platform. It also harnessed the world's largest supercomputer to do real-time segmentation. So I'm pretty sure that this person, who is a single marketer at a golf supply store, there was a disconnect in terminology. So I asked, what do you mean by segmentation? And the response was, well, when somebody opts out from an email communication, I want them to be removed from that email segment and added to another list. And I said, well, that's not segmentation. That's actually called an automation. That is marketing automation. And she says, no, that's segmentation. If she was to go online and she was to do a search, what she would be searching for is the concept of segmentation. I know at that point in time, she will end up buying marketing automation. If I was to put an ad in front of her, if I was to send her an email, if I was to have any engagement, and I said, Pardot is the best marketing automation platform, would she have found that relevant at that time? And the answer is not at all, right? So yes, that she would need that in the journey, but at that time, it is completely irrelevant, hence it wouldn't get engaged with. So if I understand then where somebody is in one of these 3 stages, I can then understand how to be relevant to them extremely well. Then this also changes the goal of a lot of my content programs from saying the goal of this program is to generate a lead to saying the goal of this program is to move somebody to the next stage. But we have to understand is that a person will be able to move themselves from stage to stage. They may start in any stage, and they can skip stages. They can do those things on their own. What we have to be able to do is identify where they are and then help them move and give them the options to skip. We cannot force any of those things to happen. We have to enable them to happen and allow them to happen when they want to happen. right? So why we engage with content is also extremely important to this process. And we need to understand why we engage. And there's some very key ideas on why we engage. The first is escape. And I want you to understand this concept, right? So think about this. 90% of the time when someone picks up the telephone, they're doing so to escape the scenario. And you say, okay, that may be true for young adults, and that may be true for tweens and all those. No, this goes for executives. An executive study found that executives self-reported this, that 55% of the time that they pick up their telephone, they are doing so because they are bored. Right? So it may be different, however, it is still a significant portion of B2B buyers are picking up their phone just because they're bored. And then you look at the society around us, it is no longer acceptable to take a smoke break. We don't smoke, we're told not to smoke. So during the day, when we need a break from our work, we used to just go take a smoke break. Now we need some other way to do that, and we're going on to social media to get that break or for escapism. Right? And so this kind of gets into the barrier of saying, well, if we're then going to try to engage with content when somebody goes onto one of those channels, understanding what their purpose is for that engagement, we can now craft content correctly for that purpose. Right? Why are they engaging? They're engaging to escape. This is what Caterpillar did given those scenarios. They said, all right, we know someone wants to escape, so let's make something that helps them escape and gives them some entertainment. And so this is what they did. They made a giant Jenga set. Each one of these blocks weighs 60,000 pounds, right? They then they take all of their equipment, which is shine equipment, and they then play a game of Jenga. And this is phenomenal. As you can see, it's almost 3 million views. I checked on it yesterday, right? And by the way, their subscriber count is up to 42,000 people. Let's be clear. None of us are ever going to buy a piece of Caterpillar equipment. I desperately want one, being a Southerner and having a farm. I want to play with this stuff all the time, but I'm not going to buy it for a business, right? But yet I definitely watched this video and found entertainment from it. That gets into the whole idea of content marketing over a very long life cycle. Understanding it's going to take a lot of different types of engagement. Psychology, and the new terms of psychology, call this a mediated relationship, where it's going to take a lot of different engagements that are phatic, meaning they're not extremely deep, across a wide spectrum. And this is a great example of one. Another type of thing what we're going to do is we're going to learn, right? The example of learning is simple. Right now, what you are doing is you are learning. You are empowering yourself to do your job better. In the B2B space, this does not mean how to, specifically in context to your tool or your service, but it means how to the person's job, right? So helping somebody do their job better is what that person is really wanting to learn, right? If you go into Ardith Alvey, she's a good friend of mine, a phenomenal writer. You should definitely read her new book, Digital Relevance. She always talks about making the person a hero, right? There's a girl named Kelly Sierra. She talks about user experience, and the whole point is making the person a badass at their job, right? So if you can help people do this, and by process they are learning how to do this, then you can accomplish that goal and build that very deep relationship with that content. Here's the way that Caterpillar did that as well, right? Now, the next is then research, and we talked about this concept of physically how we do this, and the most common way that we do research is via some type of a search engine, most likely going to be Google, or it could be others. And then the final one, which you might not really understand, is presence. And this idea of presence is something new, and I really want you to understand this at a very deep level, but it's the idea of why do we use social media. We use social media because of this concept of presence. We are now mediated beings, meaning we have, on average, 7.4 different social channels that we subscribe to if we own a smartphone, and then we have a different self across each one of those channels. Those channels also allow for bidirectional. They allow us to push our presence out into the world, as well as people to then be present with us, right? So it allows for presence both forward and backward. And then when someone acknowledges that presence, such as if you were to like someone's photo, that then acknowledges that presence and fulfills my purpose for being on that social channel in the first place. So that's a whole nother idea, and we'll get into that, what that means in content. But Byron, I think you wanted to hop in here with a question.
Matthew, I want to go back to two questions about the girl at the party. How did you make out with her, number one? No pun intended. But more importantly, perhaps, and the real question is, would you test content with that language problem? I mean, one of the goals of content marketing, of course, is to learn the wants and needs of your customers, but in this case, it's the wants and needs and the language they're using. Would you consider testing a piece by, say, Pardot on segmentation versus automation, trying to educate and acclimate her on the difference between the two as an attraction and an engagement device at that early stage in the funnel? Can you talk about content creation as it relates to that staged funnel approach?
On a personal note, it did not go anywhere. It was an engaging conversation that suffered about as far as that went. But in terms of content, yes, exactly. And what you'll find is people will then use different words at different stages. So the only way that you're going to know these stages, there's two ways to do it. One is testing, but a much faster and more direct and more accurate way is asking. And so setting what we would call conversations, and to steal a term from my friend Ardith again, these should be interviews, not interrogations. Sit down and find people that are leads, that are prospects, that are current customers, and ask them, what search terms did you look for? What search terms do you look for when you try to do better at your job? What search terms did you look for when you're trying to evaluate software? And then figure out what those terms are. And then you can start using and then better refining them through the testing of content itself specifically. And then what that'll also do is then when somebody searches for that term or engages with a piece of content that is hyper-targeted and relevant to that term, it will then clue you in exactly as to where they are in the buying cycle, because they're not going to engage with something that is not relevant to them given the other opportunities and options that they have. Does that help answer that?
It does indeed. Carry on.
Cool. And this is a slide about social stuff. So let's talk about one more thing, right? So as you guys can tell, I'm getting deep into media theory and psychology and stuff, but it's stuff that you really have to understand. The last thing we really want to hit is this concept of a cue. And this is the historical idea of being remembered. So people used to say, you need to be remembered, and there's the psychological term of a cue, and that's the actual piece in our brain that we would store this in. This is very important. There was a study that came back out in 1957, and it was titled The Magical Number 7. And this is the actual study that said that we have 7 working cues, meaning as a human being, there are 7 places that you're going to store stuff while you work. Right? And so these are, if we could get remembered, this would be one of those verticals. And this may be how to do my job, things I'm going to have to do at night, 7 different things we're going to keep on our brain. A new study came out and says now, since we're multitasking, we now have that cue shortened to 2 to 3, or 2 to 4, so 3 on average. And what I want you to understand with this just goes to reinforce the purpose and the need for being relevant and automating your content experiences, and we'll get to this in a second. But what you really need to understand is where are these other cues going? This is also going to be a tactic that we're going to use to automate content marketing, is to understand where we're offloading this other memory bank, and it's our cell phones, right? This is where those other memory banks are. It's our third memory bank. It's our cell phone. There's a study I just came across, and think about this, right? We share more pictures than ever, and historically we used pictures as artifacts. We would take a picture to remember things, right, an artifact. But now, there was a study, I think it came out of Pew Charitable Research, found that out of like 900 people, they found that 70% of the pictures that people took were not stored on their phone or on any device. They were literally just sent for communication. And so we're storing things on these third memory banks and using them. And what I want you to realize, look at that phone, right? That phone is showing a notification. If we are using our phones as a memory bank, the way to then trigger memories will be through notifications, and we'll get into that concept and how to automate notifications in a second. Right, so this new content for a limitless world. So this is kind of where I think you guys were imagining this talk to go, and I'm going to get that backstory to get here. But what we need to understand is to automate content marketing, first off, we have to have that basis of stage-based content. Because if we can understand stage-based content, our goals of content marketing become not just to generate leads, but to identify the correct stage that the person is in. That will give us relevance and increase our engagement rates. Then the next goal will be to move them to the next stage, and that is the basis of content marketing in the future. For you to do that, though, you have to have a single customer view. You have to have some system of relevance that includes internal and external. Traditionally, marketing automation platforms and a CRM will give you this. So if you already have those two pieces of technology, you have a single customer view. But if you don't, you have to have that to start. It has to technically be there for these things in the future to happen. And now I'd just like to throw in this quote. This comes from Kimberly, Ruth. She's Director of Customer Experience of Room and Board. And this just kind of iterates the point, right? We want to be relevant with our content, not invasive. And it's only through understanding each individual and then automating things on an individual level that we can be relevant. Right? And so let's talk about being relevant on owned media channels. Owned media channels being the channels that you own. And it's kind of an easy one to understand. And let's really focus in on your website. Now, I want to kind of to expand your mind for a second, right? I want you to think about this. How many pages do you have on your website? How many of those pages have content on them, right? Now let's talk about this. How many pages on average does a person visit? If you want to know the statistic across the entire board, it's 1.7 on average on really optimized B2B websites. The answer is 4. So somewhere between 1 and a 7/5 and 4, right? It's kind of how many pages on average someone is going to go to. But as you just said in your head, you have hundreds of thousands of pages, and the majority of them have content. So the traditional way that we would say how you're going to get people to content would be to optimize the flow of our website. Right? We would use a tool like Omniture or Google Analytics to find out where people are going, and we would optimize call to actions, change colors. Those things are going to give us changes in the single-digit range, such as 5% engagement, 9% engagement. Those are great, but that is you're optimizing for the wrong thing right now. Right? What I want you to understand is the difference between static and dynamic. Dynamic is the actual answer to that question you're trying to solve. Think about the difference of a website where someone flows to a zero-click website where everything is completely brought to them and they never do anything other than engage. That is where you want to go, and that is to get there is dynamic content. Here's a great example. Right, so let's add a bunch of these theories under this one screen. This is a website that's using stage-based content and dynamic content. Right, so these 3 boxes that I have, circled in red, these are dynamic content blocks that are being powered by a marketing automation platform. So what you need to understand, they have a base level website. They just added these 3 things to the right to the website. It's very simple integration. What is going on is the system is reading the individual. So when a person lands on this page, they're looking at that person's cooking, seeing all the information they know about that person. They know what stage that person is in, right? So there's trick number 1. We know the person. This is now personal. Now what we do is the first 2 become stage 2, and the next one becomes stage 3, or the stage the person is in, and then the next stage, right? So we serve up content and say, hey, we know what is going to be relevant to you right now is stuff in the stage you're currently in. But we also want to give you the ability to jump ahead. This technique is called choose your own adventure. It's not something that is like a brain, twisting crazy thing I came up the wall with. I stole this from the books I used to read as a child, right? And those were the choose your own adventure books. When you got to the end of the chapter, do you want to slay the dragon? Well, then go to page 65. Or do you want to save the princess? Go to page 75. Of course, let's go. That's kind of the idea. You can expand upon this idea with the idea of predictive or proactive. What we just showed was a reactive dynamic model. You can also get into a predictive dynamic model. And the idea of predictive is that it is proactive, it is personal, and it's being used by some of the biggest brands. Right? This is Diesel. Diesel is a clothing manufacturer. When they implemented dynamic content across their own media channels, their website, and their email, they increased revenues by 25%. That is a massive, massive win, right? If they were to only increase engagement rates on a call to action or a page by fractions, by 10%, 5%, the trickle-down effect would not have been that massive of a gain in revenue. By looking at the problem completely differently, by looking at content and looking at the idea of a dynamic experience and serving up that content, they changed the entire model and got a revenue increase in a massive, massive way. If you as a marketer were to go to your CEO and say, I drove revenue and I can prove it by an increase of 25%, imagine what your bonus would be at the end of the year. All right, so next is journeys. So we have to understand that the buying cycle is much longer, and that's not something you've been told. I don't need to reiterate that. But what I want to talk about is then what do we do with that journey, and in between the first and the second stages. You can then get into these ideas. Some people call them nurturing programs. Some people call them journey maps. It really just depends on the tool that you're using. But what we need to understand is how to actually build them, right? And so what you see on the screen is not how I want you to start. So first off, and I'm going to teach you something real quick, and there's a chapter in the Marketing Automation for Dummies book, and the chapters all over the place in different publications I've written on this concept of agile marketing. Let me explain really quickly the basis of nurturing. They are timed actions. Time means you have time to wait and see what happened with that past action before you have to build the next action. So I'd suggest, rather than investing all your time and building this massive journey map and then going into your program and investing all the time to create the content, create the emails, build the map, argue with people about what should happen, start with 3 actions. Build 3 actions. See how those actions go, then from that learn, and then build your next 3. It's an iterative process. And what you will end up with is a very powerful, accurate program very quickly, very effectively, and not maxing out your resources. Because remember, you've got a crap ton of other stuff to do even while you have to build this. Right. So relevant and journey. So what you can prove through these, and these techniques I'm about to teach you, I taught a company years ago. They'd already been doing nurturing programs, and then I taught them to look at them in a stage-based model. They increased the revenue from email by 300%, right? Not the click-through rates, not the open rates, the revenue by 300%. And then this is what I want you to understand. Remember, the goal is to move somebody to the next stage. And in B2B decisions, take this for an example. There's 7 people on average in a buying cycle, but on average, you will only have 2 to 3 of them in your database. So let's look at a couple of ways to get to those people, right? This is nurturing outside the bounds of email. This is nurturing in a technique called account-based marketing, right? It is not super effective for lead generation, but it is amazingly effective for getting to those other 4 to 5 people in the buying cycle who are decision makers, right? So here's another piece of this. Why do we need to reach those people? Because the people doing the research are not the decision makers, right? And they, once again, the idea of discovery, they will want to discover things rather than you calling them and telling them. So make your ads discoverable rather than ads, right? And then you can use account-based marketing tools. There's demand-based, there's terminative, there's a whole host of others that will allow you to target people based on the IP address of the company. You can then sync that up with your marketing automation platform and nurture people both via email and via online advertising because they're real-time bidding models. And Byron, I know you had something you wanted to ask me about this one.
Several hundred questions surfaced, and a couple that were back a little bit that I might ask about. I loved your comment on be relevant, be invasive, a quote you had picked up. Can you show some examples of do's and don'ts, perhaps, of, what is being relevant, in your mind?
Perfect, yeah.
And how does that differ from not being invasive? So perhaps a dose of relevancy, but more invasive. How do you cross that line?
Yeah, that in itself is an hours-long conversation. I dig really deep into a conversation of the book. By the way, I'm not trying to pimp out the book. I don't get paid for the book. I don't make any money off that. It's just if you wanted to further that, there's a lot of places to go. What you need to understand about relevance is a couple things. First off, the words that they're going to use, that's your first trick. The second is what they're trying to solve at those problems, and that's going to get from user stories. The third thing to being relevant, and here's one of those tricks that help that company get to the 300% mark, is understanding the difference in what I would call being socially literate, right? So let's just take email for an example. And if you were to look at emails, and you were to take all of the emails your company sends and put it into 2 buckets, emails marketing sends, emails everybody else sends from their email, Gmail, Outlook inboxes. Which of those 2 has the higher email open rates, and by what percent? The answer is going to be, on average, by 95% in the favor of people from their personal email inboxes. and look at the difference, because where those emails go and where they come from and who they go to are the exact same people. What is different is the language that we use and the crafting of that email itself. So go back to that idea of disqualification and qualification. Think about what you are physically doing in your head. You only have about 200 characters of information to determine instantly if that is relevant for you or irrelevant for you, and you do it with amazing accuracy because marketers tend to write with the golden pen, just like salespeople tend to speak with the golden tongue, right? They're trying to optimize for the mass. But when you realize when you write a personal email, you are crafting it only for one person. You write with a different language. And then secondly, when you actually physically write that email, you write it in rich text. Because how many marketers have ever written a single email in full formatted HTML for a single person? And when we're building these journeys, they're completely personal. Remember, they're going to one person at one time. So we need to make sure that we are actually engaging and looking like we actually care about a single person and talking to them as a single person at a single time. So that's a great way of showing relevance. And the next is just like I said, in stage one, try to focus on helping that person do their job better. In stage two, usually it's more social proof, such as now that person has bought into the idea and understands their pain. In a B2B buying cycle, they now have to convince a group of other people to put this on the docket. And then stage three is typically vendor selection, and people will choose the vendors and make their short list well before they ever reach out to you. So it's understanding kind of what is relevant to that time kind of helps you design that relevance in a systematic way.
Makes sense. Carry on.
Cool. All right, so let's get to some pretty crazy stuff. So let's go back to that whole concept of presence. And this is a new idea that I unveiled earlier this year, and I've been doing a ton of research on this. And so this is a lot of theory, but I'm also going to back it up with some hardcore actions for you. So micro actions. Go back to the concept of why people engage on social media, right? And the idea is presence. First off, there's a purpose, and that purpose is presence. Social media allows you to be present. We are mediated cells, meaning that we have on average 7.4 different media channels that we are actively engaged on. And so we have these different images. When we post something, we are sharing an image of what we want, right? Think about us being the director of our own movie that's being played out on everybody else's TV screen. I remember taking an English class in high school, and the most fascinating thing I learned in that English class was we looked at videos, and the professor told us, he goes, you will never see anything in a video or read anything in a book that the director or the writer did not want you to see. And that is exactly how we as individuals view our social media channels, because we control everything that goes out. We will express what that presence is that we want. Conversely, when people then engage with that, that then validates that presence. So these ideas of micro actions are much smaller interactions, but they're still content. So think about liking someone's post. Think about commenting on people's blogs. Right? So this is a great example of ReadyTalk. This is a software called Influitive that they use to do some amazing things. And what they did is they had these advocates, and they were able to then use those advocates to express these micro actions and generate some amazing things. And what they did with that was they were able to then do 190 referrals, 70 advocates opting to be sales references, 42 blog comments. And what you really realize is that social media is still word of mouth. And understanding if you can help people validate who they want to be, you can drive those relevant brand impressions. Now, take that back to the following consideration that I said earlier of where is that final frontier? And that final frontier is the notification screen on the person's cell phone. What gets you there? Notifications via social channels. Comment on a post, pops up on a notification. Like a photo, pops up on a notification. Not in the news feed, which you're competing with everybody else in those 1,200 other posts every time they log on. So 1,200 times 17 gives you a massive number. I went to a state school. I can't do that kind of math. But you get my point. So that's kind of what you need to think about on that. And so with this, I'm going to kind of wrap it up and bring us into the time of questions. But remember, content is not just what you can normally consider content. It's a relevant engagement and can be anything from micro action to a blog post. Intelligence is the key to better content distribution, not more mass media. Automation is really the execution of your intelligence. It's knowing where to do something, how to do it, and why to do it. And that is what really drives engagement. It's not just doing more of something, it's doing the right things. One of my coaches used to say, it's not practice that makes you perfect, it's perfect practice that makes you perfect. And then, new social ways are amazing ways to be able to leverage distribution by using your advocates, by doing micro actions, and all these different ways. So hopefully that was an eye-opening thing, and probably not what you expected in terms of how to automate content marketing, but definitely the future of content marketing for you. So with that, let's do some questions, Byron.
Fantastic. Question just came in from Jennifer. Thanks for that. I manage a marketing team of brokers. I want to craft a marketing automation plan targeting their prospects and existing clients in targeted segments, but my challenge is gaining access to their contact lists and having them be clean, deduped, and grouped according to the right segments for establishing these workflows. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. So first off, your brokers are if they're willing to give you those lists, first they're probably going to be highly protective of those lists, because just like a salesperson, that is their livelihood. So you're first going to have to gain their trust to allow them to let you send to that list. Next, in terms of the deduplication and the cleansing, or what I would call data governance issue, invest in a tool. There are a bunch of tools that you can just run those lists right through that will do that for you. And just type in, data governance or list cleaning into Google, and those will come up. There's a bunch of different types of ways to do it. That's a whole other chapter in that book. But really, when you get down to it is, and you said segmenting, right? So think about when you segment, not just segmenting based on, whatever their normal investment structure might be, but think about, first off, doing something larger, right? And think about what the actual goal of those campaigns is. And the goal of that campaign is to really fulfill that person's purpose, right? And that person's purpose is to be successful in life. It's not just to invest, right? They really want to be successful at life, and they want to have more money than they started out with, hence investing. So think about fulfilling that purpose in much larger ways rather than just smaller things. And the real goal is that they reach them back out to the broker, right? So think about that as your goals and try to focus on those things rather than, what piece of content. And the next thing I'd say to that is also don't think about you having to create all that content. There's so much content online that you can use and leverage that you don't have to create it. And to prove that point, think about the idea of a retweet. Have you ever clicked on a retweet? The answer is yes. Did that person create that content? No. They shared it with you, yet you still found it valuable. So just remember that there's tons of content online. Finding it and sharing that with those people will help reinforce that purpose and that relationship, and that should help drive more sales to your brokers.
By the way, we call that sharing is caring. But one of the points that I would have loved to have asked Jennifer is, we all get so entrenched in this whole marketing automation concept. Sometimes it's kind of good to step back a little bit and say, what is the purpose of content we're creating? How much content are we going to be creating, particularly for each of these segments that we're going to work so hard to try to figure out? And oftentimes what we'll find answers of is, well, we're going to do all this segmentation work. This is going to take a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of interviewing people, but in the end of the day, we're only going to publish like 2 blog posts for each segment a month. Like, really? Those are some of the ways I think people get lost in the forest, particularly with marketing automation and all the pressure we put on people. The other things are, what channels are we going to publish in? How good does the content need to be? Where are they in the buy cycle and in the trust relationship with that particular broker? There's a lot of data we can pull without seeing names on a list, and even by having the broker go down and do some scoring or grading or answering some of these questions we're talking about. I think that makes a lot more sense. So what's your quick take on persona development? which, by the way, years ago was done, almost, in a vacuum. Like, agencies were tasked with trying to nail who the target audience was, so they'd do some research, perhaps use some database management. They'd do some preliminary work, maybe some focus group testing if there was enough budget to facilitate trying to dig into who customers are. But in the end of the day, a lot of the persona development is frankly pie in the sky. Don't you think that, Matthew? I'd love your take on that. And isn't testing, honestly, learning, publishing content, seeing what people gravitate towards, seeing what resonates well with them, isn't that the secret sauce that we should all be aiming towards?
Yeah, you're completely right on that. I think the best way to frame this is I was at a Argyle Summit, which is a group that Argyle is a group that puts on these big executive forums, and I was speaking there, and there was a panel, and the guy from Informatica, which is a big company, said that the moment they moved from demographic-based profiles to behavior-based profiles, they increased their lead generation 2 to 4x. And so it's really, if you think about it, what we used to use to get to the information was demographics. I want to target somebody between 18 and 24 because they're usually the people that have the behaviors that I'm looking for. Now we can target the specific behaviors, and that's what we should actually target. And those behaviors then make up the profile or the persona. And so really the persona should be behavioral-based rather than role-based, rather than whatever else, because every environment is going to be different. And I completely agree. And then don't do it in a vacuum. And do it in a user story. Set up interviews with people and ask them a couple basic questions. What got you started going down this path? What were your expectations when you engaged with a piece of content? What could you have done better with it? Did it meet those expectations? What is your role in and just kind of start figuring all those basic things out. And that'll really kind of get you into this idea of personas and kind of help you out with content creation and then automating those stages and building those programs.
Awesome. James has an interesting question and perhaps point. Would you say that one way to conceive of this automated marketing is not necessarily to drive people to your organization's website, but rather to view each outgoing email as a kind of mini website delivering targeted content to the recipients?
Yeah, you're in the right vein. I don't know if I'd say I view it as a mini website. What I'd say I view it as is a mediated interaction. So consider it a mediated relationship is what we have to have, which means we're going to have multiple interactions across multiple different channels, all via media. So I would say it is a mediated relationship, and then it's one of the pieces of that mediated relationship. But yes, you're right. It is one-to-one completely. That is correct. And it is part of the relationship, correct? And it is not anymore just to drive people to a website. That was a holdover. The idea of driving everyone to the website is a holdover of the idea when we had to invest all that money in the website, and we did so, then we had to figure out how to prove value to it. Now we're proving value in marketing in completely different ways where people may not even ever go to a website. But most of the time they will, because that's where we host a lot of our content.
Awesome. Here's another question from Tim. As a small business, what recommendations would you have to help us get into marketing automation? Most of the tools I've seen to date have been prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, my friend. Yes, they are expensive. And so when you define the term marketing automation, think about it with a big A and a little a. Right? First off, figure out what you need to automate. If you need to, and then a lot of times you can tie things together. There are also, as time progresses and technology progresses, lots of other marketing automation vendors that are much less expensive, that are slimmed down tool sets, that can get you to probably what you need to get to at a lower cost. But I'd say first off, just kind of figure out what you need to do, and then just start researching, how to do it. There's a lot of ways which, like I said, you can combine things together. And the best piece of information I can probably give you is remember that everything always ends up with a URL. So just try to make sure everything always focuses and lives on a URL, and you can usually figure out some way to track it and automate it.
Paul, a great question on a tightrope of where we stand right now, perhaps in the industry. Ready? Here it is. Given search drives all this, and Google has fresh algos all the time regarding content, how do you recommend we balance content segmentation and planning with SEO demands?
That's a constantly moving target. And you're correct. Search is a large portion of this, but it's not the only portion. That's a responsive action. A lot of these mediated relationships we can be proactive and drive into, and just so kind of like keep that in mind. So search does play a part, and SEO will always be important. And for those that have just now started to invest in SEO, it's a much tougher battle to win. I would suggest in finding new ways to win the SEO game, and the best way to do that is through publication. So a good example, when I wanted to own the SEO search term, Marketing Automation Thought Leader, I wrote an article. That article then got published on Mashable. And now if you type in Marketing Automation Thought Leader into Google, the article I wrote with the top 25 marketing automation thought leaders owns that space, right? And that took one article, and it happened literally overnight because of the power of those two other publications. So try to get other publications to be able to then leverage those. Don't expect your own internal blog to ever be able to compete for a term like that against those other powerhouses. It's very, very, very difficult to do so. It's much easier to be able to leverage other things like that. Hence, I mean, Byron, to give you guys a plug, that's a great way when you can use other people to write for you and then to get into those publications. And that really gets into the idea of understanding modern media and being socially literate and technology literate, and the idea of just driving SEO from our own website. Yes, we may want to get them there, but in the scheme of the buying cycle, maybe that's not the right time to get them there. Maybe we could get the same impression, maybe we could get the same information, do the same relationship building, get the same stage-based movement out of publications from other places or social media or social selling or whatever your flavor may be or your go-to-market strategy may be. But in terms of your direct question, the SEO game, it's constantly changing. You just got to try to stay up on it, and that all then goes back down to the user stories. You got to know what people are searching for to know what to write for in the first place. And as long as you're honest and writing good content with the words that people are looking for, you should be able to kind of win the SEO game. The little tricks like, mobile getting and stuff like that will always be technological barriers that you'll have to overcome. But just try to stay up with them and do them when you can.
Do you think that we'll end this perpetual thirst to pepper keywords into our content and have such a focus on keyword optimization in the content we create? Do you think there will be an end to that journey?
That's a technical question that gets far beyond my level of understanding. It's all going to the lady's point before, it's all going to be based off what Google finds, right? So however Google finds the best and most accurate way to answer your question, that will be what happens. And currently we use that based off of keywords. If they end up, and once again, SEO is such a massive algorithm that the actual keyword is important, but there are so many other factors in SEO optimization. And whenever Google finds a better way that doesn't involve keywords, then they'll do it. So, we can't say for certainty that it'll always be, but currently of the best technology available, it seems to be at least something for our foreseeable future that will stay that way.
Great question here. Facebook has reduced friend network reach and have forced us to pay to play. Google Plus is on the decline. What would you suggest to extend the reach of our content?
Yes,
Caitlin, great question.
Caitlin, you should be jumping for joy that they limited organic reach. And here's my example and reason why. Paid reach is probably the best trick that you have in your playbook right now, because if you learn how to use paid reach, you can reach people that are outside of your audience in hyper-targeted ways for rates that are ridiculously, insanely low, right? So go back to that idea of escapism and look at go back and then read Gary Vaynerchuk's book, Jab, 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 Right Hook, and follow some of those practices, and then combine that with the idea of putting articles and not advertisements inside of people's news feeds, and you can drive some serious relationships and some serious engagement off of social media in ways that were never possible with sheer organic, because you would have had to invest in that person to becoming a friend or a follower in the first place.
David asks, so how do you overcome the plague of distractions that the Internet searchers experience to become the link that they choose to read?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this gets into there's no silver bullet answer, right? So it depends. I've had articles that I've written that are 2,000 words that then become the #1 article read on a website. And I've had articles that are very short become the best articles read. And it just depends on, what your topic is and what your audience's appetite is. And I'm writing my next book, and a lot of people keep telling me, you got to make this book super easy and super digestible. And I'm arguing against that. I'm making this book much, much deeper because I believe there is a need for some people that want a deeper understanding and a deeper dive into these topics and the reasons why, rather than just a gloss over them. So it just really depends on what your tact is, but do anything, do it well, and it usually works. It just depends on your execution in the scenario. So there's no real answers to that one. It just depends. But
we've reached the final hour, but I have one final question for you, Matthew, and that is there a high likelihood that you might return to Content Marketing Conference with some fresh new stuff and also a book that's coming up in May of 2016?
Yeah, I wonder who's asking that question. The answer to both of those is yes. So I'll definitely be coming back to Content Marketing World. I had a great time out there, great audience, so I'll be happy to be back. And
I love the fact you said Content Marketing World, because that means we're synonymous now.
Damn it.
I love that. No, that is a wonderful Freudian slip. I'm going to send Joe a quick email saying that we are being interchanged with Content Marketing World. So hats off to that. But good stuff all the way around. Matthew, just a wonderful and great presentation today. Thank you for bestowing all this great knowledge to us. Thanks for being here with us.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening.
Matthew and everyone, hope you enjoyed the presentation today. Until next month, I hope your life's a little smarter, better, faster, and wiser thanks to this webinar series. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next month.